Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Digital Photography program at the School of Visual Arts. We are thrilled to have distinguished photojournalist Yunghi Kim as tonight's guest speaker. Originally from South Korea, Yunghi is based in New York and is represented by Contact Press Images. In a career spanning 31 years, she has covered stories of conflict in Somalia, the Rwandan genocide and its ensuing refugee crisis, the South African elections, the fall of the Indonesian dictator Suharto, and the wars in Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Among her many professional awards, she is the recipient of the World Press Photo Foundation's Awards, Magazine Photographer of the Year by POY, and Visador for News. She was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for her coverage of Somalia in 1992 and a 2012 recipient of the United Nations Leadership Award in the field of photography by the International Photographic Council. So please give Yunghi Kim a warm welcome to our lecture series.
Thank you for having me. I'm surprised you guys all came to see me. I've been photographing 32 years. Since I was 18, photography was my passion, and I think photography was my passion because I couldn't speak English very well. I came here when I was 10 years old and I spoke no English. And I struggled through high school, and I discovered photography in high school. And so ever since then, photography was something I was very confident with. And also in college where I went, Boston University, I discovered photojournalism. I went to work for a school newspaper, independent school newspaper, and that was my passion. And so since then, which was early 1980s, I never looked back. There was nothing I wanted to do but photojournalism. And I might say, like, photojournalism then, 32 years ago, it wasn't used that much. Now, advent of digital photography and social media, photojournalism term has become very popular. But photojournalism, basically, the way I know it, is visual storytelling. And it's different from other photography in that it applies journalism ethics. So just to show, I'm not sure how many images I can fit through in an hour, but some I'll go through fast and some I have stories. So this is an image that I shot this year at Baltimore at Freddie Gray's. After his funeral, there was a big protest, as you recall. There was riots broke out. So I just got in my car and went. And the reason I was interested, because I had been covering protests. It started with Occupy Wall Street, 2011, right here in New York City. And I've covered protests in the city, and Baltimore was close enough, so I just got in my car and went down. And this is the image that I took. And I would say, you know, I view photojournalism as a craft, visual storytelling craft. I view it as a long-term investment in this craft, and I think of it as a journey that I've been on for 32 years, and I'm still on it. And I still love nothing more than anything else being outside taking pictures. You have to be outside in the field taking pictures, not in your computer in front of Photoshop. Anyway, so you have to capture it in camera, and that's what I love, being outside, taking pictures. You know, some people say witnessing history, meeting people, all sorts of stuff. There's, you know, photojournalism as higher mission is that we're documenting history, part of it. Anyway, so this is from Baltimore. This is from, on the other side of the protest, this is from a police officer, Randolph Holder, who was killed in New York City at his funeral. Three of the things that are very important to me, and different photojournalists have different ways of working, is I'm a big fan of moments, capturing moments, unfolding moments. When shit's going down, you're there, navigating it, anticipating it, and photographing it. Secondly, is capturing people's emotions, because that conveys to the reader of what people go through. And so, and then the third thing is establishing intimacy with the photograph. So this is a series of a project I did about 10 years ago on widows of Afghanistan. This is Miriam. And this was, often I'm not assigned to stories, but I'll just think of like this is a story that needs to be told. So I've done a lot of women's issues stories. So I wanted to do a story on widows in Afghanistan, and I met Miriam. And the way I met Miriam is I was at a care food center where she was getting bags of grains once a month, given out free by care. And so I went there, and I can't explain it, but she looked at me, and it was the way she looked at me, and my instincts said, she's the person I want to photograph. How do I explain it? I can't explain it. Sometimes when you make an eye contact, sometimes people want something from you. But she wanted nothing. She just had a very sweet eye. And the way she looked back at me, something told me I needed to go home with her. So I went home with her. And I spent like a week with her, maybe longer, on and off, visiting her. And I did the whole photo essay on Miriam. And she's crying because this is in her kitchen, and she's telling me a story about how her husband died. And one of the things that's great about what I love to do is I love talking to people and listening to people. And sometimes I'm very nosy. So, but you have to relate to people. You have to find out what's the situation, what their story is. And by doing that, and then sometimes they want to tell you the story because they're so upset. They want a voice. They want a vent. And so you spend a lot of time listening. So it's more than just taking a picture. It's going into somebody's home and making them comfortable, but also finding out what the story is, what they've been through, what's the issues, pain and suffering, whatever. Anyway, so this is, I spend a lot of time. There's a translator right next to me who's a female. I don't think a male could have done this story, but female translator. And so she was telling me her story, and as she was talking, she looked over and she was crying. This is in 1994 in Goma, Zaire. There was a terrible thing of ethnic fighting, cleansing, that led to a genocide that came out later, Rwandans, between Hutus and Tutsis, and then massive Hutus fled into neighboring country, and I went there in 1994. And sometimes eyes are important to me in a photograph, because sometimes it tells you their character. Sometimes they tell you emotions. The way the eyes look at you, the way eyes, I watch for people's eyes, how they react to me. And there's emotions in eyes. This is in 1992 in Somalia. This is a Somali refugee. There was a famine in Somalia. And I went to the border to Kenya. And I was attracted to her by her red scarf. And I didn't speak to her once, but I watched her, and she filled up her kettle, and after she did that, she took one sip. And this is before digital, so it's film. So I had two frames. One was out of focus, and the second one was sharp. And I didn't know what I had until weeks later. Now you see it in the back of your camera, which I think is kind of cheating, but I didn't know what I had. But, so there was this little encounter that I had with this woman without ever speaking to her. So this just recently ran in New York Times. I shot this 20 years ago. And so just to give you a little history, and if you have any questions, just ask, because sometimes I'm not the best speaker, so sometimes I forget little info. But so I did a story. I'm Korean American, and I did a story. This is a big issue in Korea, and it's gone on for over 25 years, which is during World War II, there were a group of women, mostly Korean, but other Asian countries, who were recruited with promises of jobs when they were in their teens. And when they thought they were getting jobs, this is by the Japanese, and when they thought they were going to get jobs in factories, doing laundry, cooking, in Japan, they found themselves as sexual slaves in the front lines of the World War II that the Japanese army was fighting. And so this story was kept quiet, and it broke in 1990s. So when I heard it in 1996, I heard it on the radio. And when I heard it, it almost brought me to tears. I couldn't believe what I heard. So I wanted to, it was more out of curiosity, and I wanted to meet them. So it took me like 6 months to figure out how to go to Korea. And this is like before social media, you know, when Asia was really on the other side of the world. And now, like with Twitter and everything, you know, everything that's going on instantaneously comes over on social media. You know, this is another era before the internet. So I went to Korea. This issue is a big issue with Korean American community in areas like states like California, New Jersey, New York, Washington, D.C., where there's large Korean communities. This issue was big 20 years ago, and it still is a big issue. And so last week or 2 weeks ago, there was this political event that happened where the Korean president and the Japanese prime minister got together and they came to an agreement. And so after 25 years, there was this big news about the comfort women. And there was yet another apology. And so after 25 years, New York Times Lens blog ran it. And so this was taken 20 years ago. And most of the grandmothers that I photographed are gone, except for one. So their stories, their legacies live on with images, and it was published 20 years ago. And that's the power of photojournalism, is that it carries on. It has a place, that it doesn't die. So these were taken 20 years ago. This is grandmother Kyung Da Kyung, and she was one of my favorite grandmothers. She passed away. Just to tell you a story, she came forward about the comfort women. I have their stories. She heard on the radio in the 90s when this story broke that the Japanese government had denied there was such thing as comfort women, comfort stations. And she came forward because she said, they're lying, I was a comfort woman. And so she came forward in the 1990s because of the denial. And often, a lot of the stories, or this is grandmother Sompanim, is, you know, they were recruited. They went into villages, and you know, you're talking about Korea, what you see in MASH, you know, villages, World War II, very different from Korea or Asia that we know today. And they went off because they thought they were promised jobs. And so when they got there, they were in these different exotic, faraway places, like in Indonesia, islands of Indonesia, Taiwan, and they were forced to have sex with 20 to 30 Japanese soldiers a day. And if they didn't, they were beaten. A lot of them, they will tell you they were beaten. And the stories are all the same, 20 to 30, you know, and they all thought they were getting jobs. And so, and it's amazing that it was kept secret all this time. This is Kyungdak-kyung's grandmother. And so when I went to Korea, I spent a month, but I would just kind of go every couple of days, go visit them and build on a story. And it was, you know, this issue has become very political now because the apology that happened two weeks ago, from what I read, Obama had something to do with it because it's become a security issue for the region that Japan, US, and Korea have a strong alliance against China and North Korea. So because there was this bickering about this issue for a while, kind of hinted that US wanted resolve the issue. So when I photographed it, it was just coming to light, and now it's taken up, this has become a political issue for the region, for stability of Asia. And that's why there was an apology 2 years ago, some, you know, the stories that I read. And the problem with the apology 2 weeks ago is nobody consulted the grandmothers. There's 46 grandmothers, comfort women, that are alive. It's estimated 200,000 were comfort women at one point. Historians say that. The Japanese dispute it. And so now there's 46 Korean. I think there are others in other countries. And so this is the grandmothers after protest coming back. And the women on the left is Lee Young-soo. And if you read about comfort women now, she's quoted quite a bit. And she's the last remaining comfort woman that's alive. Everybody's gone. And so when I met them, they were living in a basement apartment. There was 4, 5 of them. Sometimes some came to visit. And it was like a sorority. There was a sisterhood. You know, the group of women together, lived together. They said they were lonely most of their lives. Some never married, some did. They couldn't really discuss it because conservative country that Korea is, it's not something you openly talk about. And so when they lived together, there was support system. They cooked for each other. And they really enjoyed living with one another. And so they were in a basement apartment. And every Wednesday, this is in January, it was exactly 20 years ago that I photographed this. January 1996, they would demonstrate outside of the Japanese embassy, and they still demonstrate today. They're up to something like 11,000 demonstrations. So this is in 1996. Demonstrations outside of the Japanese embassy. If you look at the demonstrations today, it's much more organized and more media. And there'd be police officers at the corner. And back then, seeing military or police officers gathered in street corners was not an uncommon picture. You know, Korea is still at war with North Korea, so. But you don't see that today. You know, Seoul is like New York, cleaner. So this is outside of their apartment. Snow had fallen, and this is grandmother Kim Sun-duk. And this is Kim Sun-duk doing acupuncture. She lit a candle in her hand, And then in summer of 1996, when I went back to Korea, I went to visit them. And so they had moved out of the apartment, the basement apartment, and they went into a Buddhist house run by Buddhists. And so they're having dinner or meal together. This is the basement apartment in Seoul as they were getting ready to move out to go to the Buddhist house. This is Kang Da-kyun brushing her teeth and Sonpanim just sweeping the rooms, make sure it's clean. And so when I did this, you know, it was shot in black and white film, and I only shot maybe like 25 rolls of film. If I shot it digitally now, there would be way more. And I would have shot it very differently. And when you shoot film, like one of the frustrations, like I've been trying to digitize my archive because a large part of it is film. One of the frustrations that I see from digital and seeing what I shot on film is, the frustration is I should have shot more, but back then with film, you just didn't shoot a lot because it was expensive. And especially if you were out in the field, you know, you had to process and logistically, it would have been a nightmare if you shot the way you would shoot digitally now. So it's a little frustrating for me to look at like how little I shot. This is Kim Sun-duk getting ready in the morning, sorry. And you know, they were like, you know, sisterhood, share a laugh together. And they were quite playful with me. This is Yi Young-soo on your right, my left. And she's always been very gentle and, you know, nice. But when this apology happened 2 weeks ago, I saw a video of her and she was very angry. I had never seen her that angry. And this is after a Wednesday demonstration, they're sitting down in the shade. And, you know, Korean grandmothers are a little different from American grandmothers in that, you know, Americans play golf and have activities. You know, Korean grandmothers, they got a lot of visitors from university students. And this is summer of '96 when Kang Da-kyun was in the hospital. She had lung cancer. So we went to visit her. And this is in the Buddhist house, sharing house outside of Seoul that they all moved to. And this is Park Eun-young. So this was first published as a photo essay without text, just photo essay 20 years ago, 1996, and it was published in Time Asia. And up to that point, there were demonstration news pictures of them outside of the Japanese embassy, wire pictures, but nobody had done behind the scenes profiles of them. And so when I did it, and it was published in Western publications outside of Korea, you know, this is what happened. This is how it was published 20 years ago. And then it was published again in U.S. News and World Report. And it's been published all over the world. Korea Vogue magazine. And then last week it ran in the Lightbox. And I thought the headline was interesting. This is New York Times, you know, the fight to be heard. And it is. It has been a fight. If you think about how long this has gone on, that 20 years, 25 years, that this would still go on, this issue would still go on. And it highlights the complicated relationship between South Korea and Japan. Japan's history of treatment of Korea, it's not very pretty. So even though we're in the modern world, Japan has this baggage from past. and they can't seem to quite apologize. They apologize half-heartedly, but not completely. And that's why Koreans are. And you know, if there's two issues that are, I think, or that are important to Korean families, one is North Korea, because a lot of families have families in North Korea that were separated, including mine. And second one is comfort women, because it's every Korean family's daughter. That's how they see it. And the reason I did the story is I can relate to the fact that going to a foreign land for economic reasons and send money back to your homeland, you know, the old immigration. And that's how my family came to America. My mom came to New York in the 1960s. I was raised by my grandmother. I joined them later. So I can relate to immigrating outside of Korea for economic reasons. And so in some ways, this is an economic immigration story. So I'll tell you a funny story. So I have these images. This is won a lot of awards, you know, 20 years ago. And if there's one body of work that I'm known for is the comfort women. And when I did it, I might say, like, people were like, grandmothers, small country, like, who cares, you know, like. So I just went and did it. And sometimes if you're doing a project and you have passion and conviction behind it, you just go do it. Because if you have confidence and you pull it off, people will respect you. So I have two stories. One story, so I have these images. I went through it, I scanned it, I re-edited it. You know, I'm thinking it puts me back to 20 years ago. I have memories of the grandmothers, every little thing that happened as I'm scanning it. Every time I look at it, it puts me 20 years ago. So I saw Lee Young-soo in Washington, D.C. In 2012, and I hadn't seen her. So I went up to her and I said to her, and I have vivid memories of comfort women. It's who I am as a photographer. So I went up to Lee Young-soo and I said to her, "Do you remember me?" She said, "No." So then I realized she's moved on. You know, she's very famous in Korea now. She's become an ambassador for the comfort women issue. She's traveled all over the world since I photographed her. I think when I photographed her, she hadn't really traveled, except for being in Taiwan when she was a comfort woman. And so now she comes to U.S. quite a bit because of the Korean American community's interest in this. So then I realized I'm stuck in time through my photographs. And this is a chronic problem for me as I go through my archive. It puts me back when I took it. But you have to realize they've moved on. Anyway, so she's been photographed, interviewed. She's a national treasure in Korea. People, you know, young people know about her stories. And she's met a lot of photographers, I'm sure. So that's anyway, so these pictures were on exhibition in Daegu Biennial, a photo festival, and she came, and so I had to have my picture taken. And then the other thing I want to say is, I work with agency called Contact Press Images, and this was the project that put me in Contact Press Images 20 years ago when I went freelance. And when I took this picture, the director there, Jeffrey Smith, I have to credit him because it took him 6 months to get this published 20 years ago. It wasn't easy. He had to warm up the photo editors, to make a point that this is an important story. And he did it for 6 months. And then it was finally published, which is the tear sheets he had. So like, I credit Jeffrey Smith for getting this work published because, or else it would not have been published. And then when it was published in the New York Times 2 weeks ago, it was also him. You know, when he takes a project, and this is like a sign of a good agency, is that when he takes a project, he takes stewardship of the project. He knows the history of the project. It's not about download of all online sale. It's about he knows the history. He knows the effort that went into the work, and he knows every aspect about this and also comfort women issues because I send them the stories. But anyway, so, you know, he takes an interest of the work as a body of work. And, you know, that's a sign of a good agency. So then I'm just going to go through some images. I did a lot of women's issues, and this is in Herat, Afghanistan, immolation. And she was a child bride. And again, eyes are important because when you look at her eyes, you see the pain that she's in. And so you can, you know, emotion isn't always expressions, but subtle things like body languages, eyes. This is a story in Nepal, another child bride for a different publication. She was trying to get a divorce from her Indian husband. She's Nepali, but she married an Indian husband, arranged marriage, and she was abused. So she wanted to get a divorce, and she was in a women's organization, and so she was waiting for a hearing. She did get a divorce, like both families met and whatever. And the interesting thing about this image for me is the curtains, the way the curtains are moving. It kind of adds to the loneliness and eeriness of what she's going through. This is in Afghanistan, I think 2004. Women voted for the first time. Sri Lanka, I spent time, Buddhist birthday in Sri Lanka is like 4th of July in this country where everybody celebrates and it's very festive. And I was on assignment for Time magazine. This is in Jakarta, Indonesia. Kids can't afford 30 cents for the train ride, so they ride outside hanging on like that. And this is a very common thing that you see in certain parts of the world where people can't afford the train, so they piggyback on the side or on the top or in the back. And I was on the top of the train with my driver holding on to me, making sure there were no phone lines coming, because I was shooting like this and he was looking to see the phone lines, and if there was a phone line, I would duck. And this was, I was on assignment for Fortune magazine. This is in 2001 or 2, Northern Alliance, Panjshir Valley that you hear so much about, Northern Alliance soldier. Foot patrol with the British soldiers in Kabul. This is in Erbil, northern Iraq. The day that Baghdad fell from Saddam Hussein in 2003, I went into northern Iraq. I went in from Turkey. There was 2 fronts from the south, from Kuwait. I was on the north. I was coming into the second front, except the Turks wouldn't let Americans stage military there, so the border closed, and the Turks were, Turkey was very afraid of refugee Kurds coming over the border, so they sealed the border. So when the border closed, I was in Turkey at the border town. No, I'll go into that later. This is in New Orleans. I spent a lot of time doing story post-Katrina. I spent time with Lewis Robertson family. They spent 2 years in this trailer, middle of a boulevard, Claude Avenue, until their house was fixed. And so People magazine kept sending me down, and I kept going down to photograph them. And one of the things that, this is not a great picture, but I like this picture because I spent a lot of time with them in their front yard like this, in this busy St. Claude Avenue, I think. And we sat down in the summer, New Orleans heat, just talking. And I still stay in touch with them. And I took this in 10 years ago, so the kids are grown, they're going to college. And this is the family, Lewis Robertson family then. And this was the piece that ran in People magazine, so they did a big poster and I brought it down for them. Mm-hmm. He's now in college, he's big. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm stuck in time through my photographs because the kid's in college, but I think Kendall is still 10 years old. This is in Afghanistan, border to Pakistan. 2001, at the start of the US-led coalition into bombing Afghanistan after 9/11. I was at the border waiting to go into Afghanistan. I was there for 7 weeks, and this is a refugee camp where the Afghan refugees lived. Spent a lot of time in Indonesia in 1998. You know, the 30-year-old dictator Suharto fell in 1998. There was an Asian financial crisis. Madeleine Albright went on TV and said, you know, Suharto should step down, and then magically next day, Suharto stepped down. Anyway, so there were massive protests, riots. A lot of the Chinese, ethnic Chinese in Indonesia got business burnt and violence. So I spent the whole, and there was just massive student protests. And at the end of it, they finally, Suharto stepped down, and now they have democracy, elected democracy. This is in Indonesia. There was a rumor going around that this Christian man had burned down the mosque. And so it led to riots, and then it led to this. This is, okay, so this is in northern Iraq in 2003 when I was waiting to cover the war in Iraq, and it was going to be my biggest, it was the biggest war of my career. So I couldn't get into Iraq because the border was closed, and so I was stuck in this little town called Caesarea, and it's where the ISI is right now, and a lot of the Syrian refugees are coming over. It's the same area. And so this is Noah's tomb in Caesarea, and these women were checking me out. This is in Caesarea at a wedding. So I was like covering local stuff there. And then when the war started from the south in Kuwait, after 7 weeks of being in this border town, the border was closed, and it was either go home or figure out a way to cover the war. And I didn't want to go home, so I walked into Iraq. And it took me 4 nights. It was monsoon rain. I can't tell the story that well, but there is a piece that I wrote for National Geographic. If you Google National Geographic, I walked into Iraq. And this was during the safe house in Syria when, as I was walking in. I carried 2 bodies, computer, cell phone, just whatever, 2 lenses, left everything behind in the Turkish side, and I just walked in with another colleague. It took 4 nights. I didn't plan on doing it, but you know, I wanted to cover the war. So I thought it would only take like 1 night to do it. It ended up taking 4 nights because of the weather. And the hardest thing was, it was so bad weather and not being able to see, no street lights. When I stepped, I didn't know how far I was gonna sink. That was the hardest thing. It wasn't other stuff. It was like every time you sink, you didn't know you were gonna roll or you got hard surface, strangely enough. Anyway, so that was, so then I didn't talk about it when I came out because I didn't want Syrian government to know that I went into Iraq. So on the 10th anniversary of US invasion of Iraq, I wrote a first-person story, and I figure I can talk about it because I'm probably not going to go back. Anyway, so, yeah. And so when I got into northern Iraq, you know, there was no US military mostly that you could see. And so these are the Kurdish Peshmerga, and these are the guys that are fighting the ISI right now, working for US. And it was the same thing then. US strategically, you had Peshmerga fight Saddam Hussein's men. And off in the distance is Baghdad, and there were mortars coming in. Saddam Hussein's army was sending mortars, and these guys were going off. But you would strategically see special forces and little military, not a big buildup. And this is in northern Iraq. And these are the Peshmerga. And then when, I think the day that the Baghdad fell, the biggest city in northern Iraq, Kirkuk, also fell. And the strategicness of Kirkuk is that it has the oil. So when Baghdad fell, there was a race to control Kirkuk because of the oil. And so Peshmerga, as soon as they sensed that they can go into Baghdad, they can go into Kirkuk, they went into it. And I can say, whenever there is a changing front lines for journalists, that's when it's most dangerous for journalists. That's when most journalists get killed. And this was when we were rushing to get into Kirkuk. It was very dangerous because at some points we had to come back because they were shooting at us, because there'd be like pockets of Saddam soldiers. Again, changing front lines. And so this is in Kirkuk. A bank is burning. I think it's Saddam Hussein's bank, and they're looting stuff and they're just going by. And this is what it looked like in Kirkuk. That's, soldiers. When we got into it, like as soon as we got into it. And this is Saddam Hussein's soldier captured. And then there was this story, the Kurds, they don't like the Iraqis, Saddam Hussein, because he was historically, they've been, what's the word? Persecuted, thank you. And so these guys in Kirkuk lived well under Saddam Hussein. And so when Baghdad fell, they had to leave because they were being persecuted now. So, but they had lived in northern Iraq for 30 years during Hussein. And so this was, and I did a little story about now they're displaced. This is a Kurdish woman. She lives with her family there. So, and now we're going back a little. In 1992, I went into Somalia. There was famine. It was my first overseas trip. I didn't really know what was going on in Somalia, but I was like 29. So I wanted to cover a big story. So I was sent to cover the famine in Somalia. This is in December of 1992 when U.S. Marines landed in Mogadishu, and I was on the beach when the Marines landed. It's very different now. U.S. Marines coming into famine-stricken town of Baidoa. This is landing on the Mogadishu beach, and it was like one of the most memorable memories that I have on the beach, watching, if you ever see mighty U.S. military kick in, it's just really impressive. I've seen it twice. First time was here, where they come over on the beach from the ships, and incredible exotic military hardware. And when they kick in, you're just awed. Second is during Katrina, when the military mobilized because they weren't prepared. And at the airport, you saw the military kick in. Just machinery, mobilization of the troops. This is on beach in Mogadishu. He was a local kid from Massachusetts, and I did a little side story on him. He was on guard post, so he slept in the guard post, and I slept over here, and you can see my camera. So, you know, writers can do interviews after, get the color. Photojournalists, we have to be on the ground when it happens, generally. Position yourself, anticipate. You know, we can do follow-up, but it's, you know, again, I'm a big fan of moments. First night in Somalia in October of '92, one of the warlords took over town, and I was caught up in the fight with the writer, and we were at a care compound. And so the whole night there was intense fighting, mortars going off. You can feel the heat from the explosions. And when there's this, I can't tell it as well, there's a story where we were hide out in the care compound, and the heroic aid worker named Bob Allen, he was with us, and I don't think I would be live if it wasn't for him. He walked out with the care hat, hands up, and he just went out to the guys that were coming in to loot the house and said, "I'm an aid worker, I'm here to help the people, don't shoot me." So anyway, so he was a medic, and he wanted to tend to the wounded, and so we went out with him, but I wasn't gonna leave him because I was scared shit. But anyway, so that's like my story of Somalia. And during the fighting, this is Bob Allen on the radio, because there's relief flights coming in regularly. And so he's telling the C-130s carrying the food in, you know, we're under attack, help. And the C-130s, they turn around, they laugh. They're like, we're not landing. So we were stuck in the ground. There were drivers, you know, aid drivers with cars. As soon as the fight started happening, which is at 3 in the morning, they got in the car, they left. So 4 of us were stuck in the compound. The person on the left is, that's Will Haygood. He's an incredibly talented journalist. He wrote the book on Jackie Robinson. He's now, I think, works for the Washington Post. Anyway, so this is the moment where he's saying, we're under attack, we're under attack. And so Bob Allen decides, well, you know, the other warlords took over the town, and he's like, well, I'll help your wounded soldier. So again, I stick to him like a glue. Will Haygood there on the left, he's helping with the bandage too, and I'm taking pictures. I'm numb the whole time. I don't, like, shaking. First time I've seen a dead body. Anyway, so this was at the time when, and you can see the care hat he's wearing. He's always wearing that hat. So it goes on for all day. They're on the radio. They do the negotiations. I'm like, you know, I don't want to spend the night here. We got to go. And so like 5 or 6 o'clock comes, and they're like, there's a plane coming from Kenya. We're going to evacuate you. So everything happens really fast. Bob Allen says, we got vitamins. We got to take the vitamins with us. We're getting ready to evacuate, put the radios in the sacks. He's like, he's taking all the paper, and he's like, well, we got vitamins. I'm like, who cares about the vitamins? Let's just go. So he goes in the back of the room. He takes out a big trunk, and he says, the vitamins, he opens the trunk. Vitamins are Somali shillings. It's what they use to pay the local drivers, get the economy going, but there's like stacks of it. But you can't let the rebels have it because they'll buy guns with it or whatever. So we take out, I have a backpack, I take out all my clothes, I stuff it with Somali shillings, all of us, get it in. The rebels, they don't know that we did this, and we left. We got evacuated. So then, I didn't see Bob Allen, 1992. He's like my hero, like aid workers, they're doing amazing things, oh my God. So I'm in Kosovo and I see him. In 1999, you know, when the refugees came over, Slobodan Milosevic kicked the Kosovars out at the end of the Yugoslavia conflict. Anyway, so I'm in this field, and there's Bob Allen. And so I got to take my pictures with him. And, he's telling me the challenges of setting up relief camp in Africa versus Europe and how the climate's different. And don't I look happy? So then I also spent time in South Africa during the elections. When Nelson Mandela was elected president, I was there. This is in Soweto. The sharing one newspaper in Soweto, day after the election, day after Nelson Mandela was elected president. These are the founding fathers of the end of apartheid, de Klerk, Mandela, and Buthelezi. So let me just show you some New York stories that I've been working on recently. So I've been focusing on New York stories. You can find stories at home. You don't have to go off into distant places. Wherever you are, if you're a good photographer, you can find stories. And so I started to focus on New York, and I've done series of them. And it started with Occupy Wall Street. And it's in my backyard. It's 20-minute subway ride. And so I just kept, I came up on it by accident. I was totally fascinated with the movement. I saw the rise and collapse of it. And so I just kept following the protests, and I wanted to capture the energy of the movement. It was very physical. Instead of going to the gym for a workout, I would go on a march because these guys, you're chasing after 20-year-olds. So they went to nationally to Republican convention, Tampa Republican convention. This is in New York City on Wall Street. There was, they occupied Wall Street. Again, an image like this is really hard to take when stuff is going down and you capture that moment of it, which is he's an undercover cop trying to get her boyfriend or her friend is trying to nab her, and you see the eyes, they're watching him. And so an image like that, I appreciate unfolding moments when stuff is happening to capture it. Arrest on Wall Street. This is how crowded Zuccotti Park got at the height of it. And I think of this as like New York history someday. I can do a book. And whenever I'm taking pictures, I'm not just taking pictures. I think someday this will have a place. People will want to see it. Kids from all over the country came. It was like Woodstock. They slept over on Zuccotti Park. Sort of a portrait. Then they got kicked out of Zuccotti Park, so they went to Foley Square in the morning. And they slept in the statue. Women's issues, because Occupy Wall Street had many issues, leaderless. They took over Wall Street, Federal Hall, which was federal property, so NYPD couldn't touch him because it was federal property. So they were there for a while, and there was this whole cat and mouse game that happened. Zuccotti Park became a tourist attraction. A lot of tour buses went by. Oh, these are kids playing cat and mouse with NYPD on West Village. And like I said, it was really, these are 20-year-olds. I'm 53. It was really hard to chase after and keep up with these guys and take pictures and go backwards and take pictures. And so they tried to take over Duarte Park, which is on Canal Street and 6th Avenue, and they didn't succeed. So I think that's all I can show. I can show you more, but it took longer, sorry. Any questions?
We have time for Q&A. I'll pass around the mic. It's not going to make your voice louder, but it's important for the video, so please speak into it.
The photographs that you made with the undercover cop with in the background with the, I don't know, was it a woman in the foreground on the ground? That's a really powerful image. Did you have a press police pass on you to allow you access?
I have it now, but at the time I didn't have it because of it's issued by NYPD, and there are certain requirements. So I didn't have it, and yeah, that's a tricky thing. I could have gotten arrested.
So you got that shot without credentials.
No.
That's wonderful. I mean, it's
Sometimes that helps, but when that arrest came down, you'd be surprised how many undercover cops there are, because you're like, wow, they came out of nowhere and just went down. So New York City has a lot of undercover cops. It's the safest city in the world. Nothing's gonna happen, because NYPD is really good.
Okay, where are you?
They're in here too.
My question is twofold, and it's when you started your career as a freelancer, did you immediately sign on to an agency?
Okay, so I didn't start my career as a freelancer. I had 12 years of newspaper. I worked for a small newspaper called the Quincy Patriot-Ledger in Quincy, Massachusetts. That was my first job. My first year salary was $16,000, as I recall. And then I went on to Boston Globe. And Somalia, I went on to Boston Globe for. And then in 1995, I went freelance. And the Comfort Women was the first freelance project. When you freelance, it helps to have a project. But I was already a mature photographer because I had the newspaper. One of the things, if you want to be a photojournalist, I think newspapers are good for is it makes you work fast because you do so many assignments. You're exposed to different types of assignments, different situations, and it makes you sharpen your journalistic instincts, I think, or help you develop it. I think that's what's good about newspapers. And then eventually, you want to move on to more your own type of photography. So then, you freelance or whatever. But now the economy is much tougher, so a lot of people freelance from beginning.
My second question would be, when you did make that transition from newspapers, did you do it so that you went directly to an agency, or did you have that project and you started working on it and then you started pitching it to other agencies?
The second one, I wanted to do the project. I went and shot it, and then I bought it to Contact. That was when I was trying to get into Contact. And then Jeffrey, the director, ended up warming up to it and pitched it. And so it was the Comfort Women that got me into Contact. But it helps to, why, are you looking to get into an agency?
What you said, I spent the past few years shooting at a newspaper in Texas. And I just relocated here and I'm freelancing now, and I'm curious just to see how others have done it and how they've transitioned.
Okay, so generally agencies, the way it works is they're not like newspapers. Newspapers, you have a community, it's like a family. Sometimes dysfunctional, but it's a family. Agencies are families, but they're more loose. You sort of have to have a sense of what you want to do. The agency isn't going to lead you, but they might respond to you if you have an idea. And so it's a slightly different, it's what you make of it. But if you want that support system, that ecosystem that you had in newspaper, you gotta find it and develop it among your peers, support system, and then figure out the agencies you kind of bring in when you need them. But they're not gonna be a department.
Right. Thank you.
But it helps to have a project.
Yeah.
Go work. Yeah.
So a lot of the situations that you're photographing in are extremely dangerous, and I'm wondering, how do you ever feel like, man, I'm never doing that again, or what keeps you going?
The only time I think about not doing it, or I have doubts, is when I leave, not when I'm packing, not when I'm coming home. Because then when I'm coming home, or I'm glad I did it, but when I'm going from comforts of my nice life in New York or home with hot shower and all the food you can eat in the refrigerator, and you're going off to places like Somalia where there's famine, you know, it's stressful. You're going into an unknown. And I talked about that in the American Photo piece today. And I would literally get stressed out, but no, never. Like, I mean, that's part of being a photojournalist, is you buy into that when you get into it. But I've done a fair amount of it, but I've also done other assignments in 32 years that, you know, that I didn't show in an hour. So my whole my whole experience is actually pretty diverse. But yeah, it's pretty diverse. But like, put me in any situation. You know, it's not about conflict. To me, you know, there's a thing called conflict photography now. To me, it's not. Like, my generation, we went to work. We got out of school. We were out in the field. We were out taking pictures. And we were filing. So to me, it's about stories, human beings, and events. It's not about conflict or non-conflict.
Hello. Thanks for your time today. I have a question. So I've heard stories of freelance journalists going into a war zone, and because they don't have a backing of a major newspaper behind them, if they get kidnapped or they go into certain situations, they don't have that protection. So when you switched from working for a newspaper and you went freelance, did you feel less safe going into, say, Iraq and war zones?
I think the kidnapping journalists have become worse because of what's going on with IS. But I think you know, I don't know how to answer that. If I have to advise Gina Moon, if she's going to conflict, I would probably talk her out of it now. But I would be a hypocrite because I've done it. But I think the world now is different too. So would I do it now? No. But if you're a young photographer and you want to do it, I understand. Would I try to talk you out of it? Probably. But if you really wanted to do it, you know, that's your choice. There's a thing called, you know, some of the stuff about being a good photojournalist, and also especially in a war zone, is you got to be kind of street smart. You got to have good journalistic instincts. And then you have to be willing to take a calculated risk, not blind risk, not just because you want to go to conflict zone. You take a calculated risk. When I walked into Iraq, I didn't plan on doing it, but I was there for 7 weeks, and I decided I was going to take that risk. And so, and it's an individual decision. I don't believe there's like, you can read a textbook about it. It's an instinct that you have. And so how do you know you have that instinct? You don't know until you're there. Is there something I can teach you? I don't know that I can teach you. So this is why, like, I wouldn't say not to do it, but I wouldn't encourage you to do it either. It's a personal choice, I think.
If a paper sends you in, does it make you feel safer? Because they have the resources to
right,
get
they have
you
the
out?
backing and resources, right. So like, right. But not all the places I've gone, I've had backing. So sometimes you go there and you get picked up. It's a very different climate now. Yeah. But if you work for like Associated Press, you know, they're going to insure you. If something happens, they're going to. But you know, most freelancers, most publications don't have that kind of resources. And so again, it comes down to calculated risk, too. Yeah.
So like you have been like traveling around the world.
Wait,
like,
can you say it louder?
Like when you travel around the world and took those. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, and took those photos. Like you meet like people speaking like different languages. Maybe you can understand. like how can you
Work.
like communicate with them? Because I think and another question is before you take photos, do you usually ask for permissions or you just record the things you see?
Okay, so no, I don't ask for permissions. It depends on the situation, but generally you don't ask for permissions because you lose the moment, and it could be seen as a censorship. So like in New York, you know, when I do New York stories, everybody's like, no, don't take my picture. But legally, there's nothing you can do. In America, you can take pictures in public street. It's called the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and freedom of something. It's in the First Amendment, so they can't do it. But people say, like, I want my privacy. You do not get a privacy in public space. That's it. So when you go at it, but you also lose the moment, too, if you do it. So sometimes you might take a picture and then explain. I do a lot of explaining. I show a lot of my pictures on my iPhones, and I'm like really, I carry clips with me sometimes. Say I am published in New York Times. Because when you're a freelance photographer, it means you could also be a paparazzi. You know, people don't understand. So, but once they see the clip that you're in a reputable publication, you know, they understand, or they see my, you know, I tell them to Google my name or whatever. So they, you know, it's gaining access to people, and that's part of what we do. Is we make people comfortable about what we do, but we also, when there's a time where you have to take a picture, you take a picture. In terms of overseas, having a good driver and a translator is important. They're your local eye and ear. They protect you. They know the things on the ground. And one of the ways you get that is you talk to other journalists who work with other drivers or whatever. Or you know a photographer who's already on the ground and they can suggest a friend or whatever. And so having a good driver or a translator or both, depending on your budget, that's really important because they're your protectors. But not always, but like, and then sometimes you work with other photographers, so you don't have the, good driver, translator, or you share it, or there's different ways to do it. But if you're doing overseas, network with other photographers or news organizations.
So, do you think that you have some unique insight when photographing, in terms of that you're from originally from South Korea, when you're photographing New York story or other non-Asian culture, do you think that you have some unique insight when photographing this New York City story? In terms of that, you are not originally from here, but from South Korea.
Do people question my ethnicity?
No. Do you think that not being from New York or the USA gives you a specific insight into photographing here? Or, right?
I grew up here. I grew up in Long Island. I'm a New Yorker. But I'll tell you this, I've been working on neighborhood series in New York. I just did Brooklyn, Chinatown. And I'm having a blast because it reminds me of coming to New York in the 1970s and going to Flushing, New York, Flushing, Queens to go shopping on a bus with my mother. The immigrants, the energy, I was part of that. When I came here, I spoke no English. So when I go into Brooklyn, Chinatown and they don't speak English, it just puts me back to my childhood and I'm just having a blast. Coney Island, I spent Coney Island winter there, and you wouldn't know it, but did you know that Coney Island, most of it is foreign born? It's a melting pot. So many neighborhoods in New York City are melting pots. I just spent time in Jackson Heights. Same thing, and there's great stories in New York. It's just New York's a great place, really. There's no other city in the world. But anyway, so yeah. But I relate to it my childhood more than Asian. It's more my immigrant experience, I think.
Hello, Yunghi. My question is, when you worked abroad in other countries, I was wondering how you would prepare before going abroad. Would you research on your conception or your ideas on that country? Because you can't really like go out and check it out because you're in New York. How would you prepare your trip?
You pretty much, well, you know, you have an idea of what's going on in the region because you pay attention to the news. You kind of have an idea of what you need to bring. Often it's you end up bringing way more than you need. You find out when you're planning, you overthink it. Because once you're there, you realize, oh, that was nothing, always. But there's nothing wrong with it. You should be a little scared before going, because that keeps you alert. Then Alabiso, who was a director of Photo AP, one of the great director of photography that I've worked with, he told me once that if you weren't scared, you shouldn't be doing it. So, and I do get butterflies in my stomach. I have actually even cried sometimes going, why am I doing this? But I never not go, because to not to do it to me was a failure that I have to answer to myself. So I've always gone. The fact that I'm a woman, it was never an issue. Been to, doesn't matter. Asian woman, maybe, but you know, I just do it. So know that everything you think before you go do it, it's way worse. That's like, to me, the worst time. But once like you get there and you meet other photographers, you network, you have an idea of some names of, you know, people that you can contact who's on the ground, bureaus that you can go see, the photographers there, you know, Reuters, AP photographers that you can network with. But once you go there, it's not as bad as when you are at home thinking about it. I think that's the worst time. Sometimes it's good to not think too much, but sometimes it's good to think. Be careful.
I have a final question.
I knew it.
So the piece that published today in American Photography, the headline really made me think, because it mentioned this idea of looking for intimacy in photojournalism, and I think that's a complicated issue, right? Because the assumption that most people have is that photojournalism is about objectivity or detachment, and I'm just wondering if you can expand a little bit on that idea. How do you reach for intimacy without compromising fairness?
Well, I think every photographer has different ways of working within the context of reality. I think when you're doing a story on a person or photographing it, you're telling their story. So there's a get-to-know process. The intimacy would be, you know, what I explained with Afghan widow Miriam, is that I'm getting to know her story and who she is and the pain that she's gone through. So is that real? Yes. It's objective because it is her pain, but it's also the way I work. So I can choose to, it's a real situation, so I can, but when you click the camera, what lens you use, what angle you do, those are my decisions. And so through that, you have a compelling image of, you know, intimacy. I think the intimacy really means showing human of that person, humanness of that person in the way I know how to do it. So if you look at some of my photographs, you know, they show that they're human. There's, you know, whether it's a war zone or a profile of you in your living room, there's humanness to it. And I think, to me, that that's important. It's showing who the subject is, what the story is about the subject. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious, and I guess in the abstract, how do you, and I think you answered very well about showing who the person actually is at a close distance. I mean, I just imagine that there is a tension between getting so close and not falling in love with the person on some level and becoming an advocate rather than a witness.
Right. So one of the things that I love about photography, and this is like if you're serious about photography, and I tell young people this all the time, is you should think about, why do you want to do photography? What is it about photography that you love? Everybody has a different reason. So one of the things that I love about photography, and I've known this for like 20 years, is that I think of interviewing subjects with my camera. Even though I'm taking pictures, it's like interviewing them. And I get to know them. And every subject that I photograph, I learn from them. I learn about their life. I learn about the issues. I learn something. And so you have to have a conversation. You have to get to know the subject. So that's the kind of the intimacy level in a context of their life. But, it's a learning experience for me, and that's how I look at it. And I can be photographing you just the way you are right now, standing there. You just touched your eye. I thought that was interesting. So I'm talking to you, and I'm observing you, and I'm observing you shaking your head. Your legs went forward. Oh wait, he's laughing. You know what I mean? So like, even though I'm talking to you, I'm observing you. And so that's what we have to do. It's not just taking pictures. You have to try to understand the person, and also observe their being, how they react. And there's a multi-layer of issues that you do as a photojournalist. So yeah, like I can think of, like, I'm watching every single one of your faces, like I'm seeing the way you're reacting to me too, So I observe, we spend a lot of time observing. I love hanging out in a street corner and just watching people go by. Even though I don't take pictures, I just love watching people. I even have a little like portable stool that I just bought from Amazon that I'm gonna sit. I just love watching people. It's, we're studying people and human nature and how they behave and how they react. That's what it is. Whether it's Occupy Wall Street and arrest is going down. I watched the NYPD. I was like, I saw how they work. So, you don't never want to just take picture and stop. You always want to be curious. Like, one of the things that drives a lot of photojournalists is curiosity. Curiosity to tell the stories, curiosity to know the world, curiosity to know the events, travel the world, curiosity to figure out how to do it, like walking to Iraq. You never want to stop learning, and then figuring out how to translate that into a visual medium to communicate. Because I'm still growing as a photographer, even after 32 years. Like, my photography is very different from 20 years ago, and I'm just getting a kick out of it. And so you have to look at it as a journey. Like, you graduate from SVA. Think of it as a long journey that you have to go on. Which path are you going to take? How are you going to get there? And one of the ways you learn that is you talk to other photographers, and you come to lectures like this or whatever. You figure out, and then you figure out ways to have a network system among your peers, so you can bounce off ideas. I have a support system of people that I bounce off ideas. Jeffrey at Contact Press Images is one of them. I bounce stuff off of him all the time, even if it's like, he tells me, oh yeah, that's a terrible idea. All right, I still bounce it off. How about this? How about this? How about this? This is a good story. You know, you always, that's the curiosity. Like my mind is always, sometimes I get best ideas when I wake up in the middle of the night. You know, you wake up with an idea and you're like, wow.
Well, thank you, Yunghi, for a
Thank
great
you. I hope
lecture.
that was
Thank you, everybody.